I still remember the sharp bite of the wind that morning, the way the snow crunched beneath our boots as Ryan and I started up the trail. Minnesota winters were always brutal, but for me, the cold never dulled the thrill of climbing. I had grown up chasing the rush of adrenaline, chasing the next challenge, convinced that life was meant to be lived on the edge of movement. That morning was no different. My cheeks stung from the frost, my lungs burned with each breath, but my heart felt alive. Ryan walked a few steps ahead of me, steady, focused, with that calm determination he always carried. We had done this dozens of times together, weekend hikes, spontaneous climbs, long treks through the woods. Nature was our bond, our escape from the rest of the world. I thought, as I watched his back against the white of the snow and the shadow of the pines, that there was nowhere else I'd rather be. The path wound upward, slick in places where ice hid under the powder. I laughed when I slipped once, catching myself on a branch. "Careful!" Ryan called over his shoulder. His voice carried just enough amusement to make me grin. I had always been the one who pushed too far, who tested limits, and he had always been there to steady me. But then it happened. A shift, a misstep, the smallest mistake in a world where the smallest mistake can change everything. My boot slid on an unseen patch of ice. My body pitched backward before I could catch myself. There was no time to cry out, no time to think. Just the sound of my own scream tearing through the air, the crack of my back against rock, and the sickening stillness that followed. The sky spun above me. Pain exploded through my body. But stranger than the pain was the absence, the dead weight of my legs refusing to answer me. I tried to move, to scramble, but nothing obeyed. My arms trembled as I clutched at the snow. Panic surged. I called Ryan's name. He was there in seconds, his face pale, his voice trembling as he told me to hold on. The ride to the hospital blurred into fragments, sirens, flashing lights, the sting of cold air against my skin as paramedics lifted me, their voices calm but urgent. I remember clutching Ryan's hand, trying to ground myself in his warmth, trying to believe that this was temporary, that I would wake up from it like any other injury. But nothing prepared me for the doctor's words. I was lying in a hospital bed, sterile white walls closing in, the faint beeping of monitors like an unwanted metronome to my fear. A man in a white coat, Dr. Wilson, I think his name was, stood at the foot of my bed, his eyes steady, his tone careful as if rehearsed. Ryan sat beside me, squeezing my hand so tightly I could feel his pulse through his skin. "You've suffered a severe spinal cord injury," the doctor said. His words came slow, deliberate, as though each one weighed 1,000 pounds. "The damage is extensive. We were able to stabilize you, but the lower part of your body will not recover function. I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore, but you won't be able to walk again." The words should have shattered me immediately, but my mind rejected them. It was as if he were speaking another language. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, for the mistake he would correct. "No," I whispered. "No, you don't understand. I've been hiking since I was a kid. I'm strong. I'll recover. I just need time." Dr. Wilson's eyes softened, but his expression didn't change. "I wish it were that simple. You'll need a wheelchair for mobility from now on. Physical therapy will help strengthen your upper body, and there are ways to adapt, but the paralysis is permanent." Permanent. The word echoed like a scream inside my skull. My heart hammered, my throat constricted, and I felt Ryan's grip falter as if he too couldn't believe what he was hearing. Memories crashed over me, uninvited and cruel. I saw myself as a child, sprinting through the neighborhood, hair flying behind me, the wind singing in my ears. I saw the medals from track meets in high school, the photos of me grinning on mountain summits, the evenings when Ryan and I returned from climbs exhausted but exhilarated, our clothes muddy, our laughter breathless. Movement had always been my language, my freedom, my very identity. And now gone. I shook my head, refusing to let the tears fall. "There has to be another way," I insisted, my voice rising. Surgery, experimental treatments, something. I can't just sit in a chair for the rest of my life. The doctor glanced at Ryan, then back at me. Medical science continues to advance. Never give up hope. But right now, the reality is what I've told you. I'm sorry. I turned away from him, staring at the wall, at the sterile blankness that seemed to mock me. Ryan's hand still held mine, but I couldn't feel comfort in it. All I felt was the hollow terror of a future I couldn't imagine. That night, when the room grew quiet and the machines hummed like whispers, I let myself break. Silent tears streamed down my face as I stared at my useless legs beneath the blanket. I tried to wiggle my toes until my muscles ached, tried to will life back into them, but nothing happened. It was like shouting into a void. In those hours, denial gave way to despair. I thought of my father, long gone in that plane crash years ago, and how he had always called me his little lightning bolt. I thought of how proud he had been of my energy, my drive. Would he even recognize me now? And I thought of Ryan, the way his jaw had tightened as the doctor spoke, the way he avoided my eyes afterward. Did he still see the wife he married? Or had I already become a burden? Someone he would pity instead of love? I closed my eyes and prayed I was wrong. I prayed this was just the beginning of a fight I could still win. But deep down, something inside me knew life, as I had known it, had ended on that mountain slope. And the story that replaced it was going to be one I never asked to live. Coming home should have been comforting. After weeks of hospital corridors and antiseptic air, I thought I would breathe easier once I crossed the threshold of our house in the suburbs of Minneapolis. I imagined the smell of Ryan's cologne lingering in the hallway, the warmth of familiar walls, the sense of belonging. But when the door swung open and I rolled inside for the first time in my wheelchair, I realized that home was no longer mine. Eleanor was there to greet us, her posture straight, her face carefully composed. She kissed Ryan on the cheek, then glanced down at me with a tight smile. "Welcome back, Sophie," she said, as if I were some guest returning from a long trip rather than her daughter-in-law coming home from a hospital bed. Her tone was polite but not warm. Ryan fussed over me at first, carrying my bag, adjusting the chair so I could move through the entryway. I tried to convince myself this was the beginning of our adjustment, that with time we would find a new rhythm. But almost immediately I noticed how Eleanor's eyes followed me. She lingered when I struggled to maneuver around the corner, when I bumped slightly against the edge of the rug, not with concern, but with disapproval, as if my wheelchair were a nuisance scratching her polished floors. The first few days blurred into awkward routines. I spent most of my time in the living room, near the big window overlooking the snow-covered yard. The silence of winter pressed in, thick and heavy, broken only by Eleanor's footsteps echoing from the kitchen. She kept herself busy, always cleaning, always rearranging. It wasn't long before she began to involve me. "Sophie," she said one morning, setting a basket of laundry in front of me. "You can fold these, can't you? Sitting down, it should be manageable." I looked at the pile of clothes, then at her. My hands hesitated, not because I couldn't, but because of the way she asked, not like a request, but a command. Ryan wasn't home. He had already left for work. So I nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course." She hovered as I folded shirts, her eyes sharp, correcting me when my stacks weren't aligned. "You've got to keep things orderly," she muttered. "A house doesn't run itself." It stung, that edge in her voice. I wanted to remind her that I was still recovering from trauma, that every movement required more strength than it once had. But I swallowed my words. Confrontation with Eleanor always felt like standing against a brick wall. You could scream and push, but nothing would move. By the end of the week, the tasks grew. Sorting clothes, dusting surfaces within reach, organizing cupboards. At first, I told myself this was good, that it gave me something to do, kept my mind from spiraling into despair. But the truth settled slowly. These weren't acts of kindness to keep me busy. They were expectations, obligations. Eleanor was carving out my new role in this house, and it wasn't one of dignity. When Ryan came home in the evenings, I tried to talk to him about it. She treats me like I'm a maid, I whispered one night after Eleanor had gone upstairs. I need your support, Ryan. I need you to remind her that I'm still me. He sighed, leaning back on the couch, exhaustion shadowing his face. Sophie, she means well. You know Mom. She just believes in keeping the house in order. Besides, you said you wanted to feel useful. Isn't this something? Something. The word felt like a knife. I want to feel human, I said quietly. But he was already scrolling through his phone, nodding absently. The conversation died in my throat. Day by day, the distance grew. Eleanor's dominance filled the house, her voice the loudest, her rules unchallenged. Ryan, whether out of habit or fear of confrontation, always sided with her. If I tried to suggest an easier arrangement, like hiring part-time help or moving to a smaller place, he dismissed it. Mom's health isn't great. We can't leave her alone, he would say, as if my own health didn't matter. At night, when the house finally quieted, I would sit by the window, staring at the frozen branches outside. I remembered how, just months before, I had climbed trails with Ryan, my legs carrying me up steep inclines, my laughter echoing through the trees. Now I couldn't even step outside without assistance. The world had shrunk to these walls, and within them, I was not the wife, not the partner. I was an inconvenience to be managed. I tried to tell myself it was temporary, that eventually Ryan would see how much I needed him to stand by me, that Eleanor would soften once she realized I wasn't her enemy. But each day chipped away at that hope. Her instructions grew sharper, her sighs heavier when I made mistakes. She never yelled, but the silence after her disapproval was worse than shouting. The worst part wasn't the chores or the criticism. It was the way I began to see myself through her eyes. Weak, dependent, a burden. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror one afternoon, the wheelchair framing me like bars of a cage, and for a moment I didn't recognize the woman staring back. My posture slumped, my face tired, my spirit dimmed. That night, Ryan came home late. He kissed me on the forehead, absent-minded, and went straight to the kitchen where Eleanor had dinner waiting. I wheeled myself to the table, but neither of them asked about my day. They talked about bills, about weather, about everything except me. I sat in silence, invisible in my own home. It was then, in that quiet humiliation, that I realized something painful. I no longer belonged here. The house where I had once shared laughter, meals, and plans for the future with my husband now felt like Eleanor's domain. I was a guest, tolerated but not welcomed, confined but not cared for. And though I tried to hide it from Ryan, I felt a growing truth gnawing inside me, that my marriage, like my legs, might never carry me again. The first time I met Dr. Michael Carter, I wasn't sure whether to feel hopeful or foolish. He arrived one gray afternoon, carrying a leather bag and a clipboard, his coat dusted with snow from the Minnesota air. He looked younger than I expected, mid-30s perhaps, with a calm confidence that reminded me of doctors in movies, the kind who always knew exactly what to say. Ryan let him in, introduced him quickly, and disappeared upstairs to take a call. Eleanor hovered nearby, her lips pressed thin, clearly unimpressed by the intrusion. I sat by the window in my chair, bracing myself for yet another lecture about accepting reality. But Dr. Carter didn't look at me with pity. He knelt down so we were eye level and smiled gently. "Sophie Whitmore?" he asked, his tone warm. "Yes," I whispered. My voice felt smaller than I wanted it to. "I'm Michael Carter, physical therapist. I've been assigned to your case. I'll be working with you here at home if you're open to it." I frowned. At home? I thought therapy was done in a clinic. "Normally, yes," he said, adjusting the papers on his clipboard. "But given the severity of your injury, insurance approved home visits. It'll be less exhausting for you. My job is to help you regain as much independence as possible." Independence. The word lit something inside me. For weeks, I had felt chained to this chair, trapped within these walls. The idea that there was a path forward, even if not to full recovery, was a lifeline. What exactly does that mean? I asked cautiously. He smiled again, not condescending but encouraging. It means you can get stronger. You might not walk the way you used to, but with determination and the right exercises, there's a chance you could regain partial mobility. Maybe even stand with support. But it requires commitment. Every day. For a moment, I let myself imagine it, standing, even if just briefly, feeling the ground beneath my feet again. Tears stung my eyes before I could stop them. Eleanor cleared her throat loudly from across the room. "Sounds expensive," she said sharply, "and unnecessary. Sophie doesn't need false hope. She needs to learn to live with her condition. There's no point in draining resources, chasing miracles." Dr. Carter turned to her, polite but firm. "Physical therapy isn't a miracle, Mrs. Whitmore. It's medical science. Mobility isn't just about walking. It's about preventing further complications. Muscle atrophy, circulation issues, bed sores. Therapy keeps the body functioning. It's not optional." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "I've raised a family without all these modern fads. Back then, people relied on herbal teas and willpower, not expensive specialists." She gestured toward me. "I'll brew her something that helps more than these exercises." I felt heat rise to my cheeks. "Eleanor, please," but she cut me off. "Sophie, you can't just throw money at every fancy treatment. You need to be practical." Ryan came downstairs at that moment, phone still in hand. "What's going on?" he asked, distracted. "Your mother thinks therapy is a waste of money," I said quietly. Ryan sighed, rubbing his temple. "Mom just worries." "Sophie, maybe don't get your hopes up too high. If the insurance covers it, fine. But let's not go overboard." I stared at him, waiting for some sign of support, some reminder of the man who used to believe in me. But he was already scrolling through his phone again. Dr. Carter didn't let the silence linger. He shifted closer, lowering his voice, so only I could hear. "Don't let anyone convince you that progress isn't worth trying for. It's your body, your life. You deserve the chance to fight for it." Something about the steadiness in his eyes broke through the fog I had been living in. For the first time since the accident, I felt seen. Not as a burden, not as a patient to be managed, but as a woman who still had strength left inside her. When he guided me through the first set of exercises, my arms trembled, my muscles screamed, and sweat beaded on my forehead. Eleanor muttered disapprovingly in the background, but I tuned her out. Dr. Carter encouraged me. Every small movement a victory. "That's it," he said softly. "You're stronger than you think." By the time he packed up to leave, my body ached, but my spirit felt lighter than it had in months. After he left, Eleanor immediately pressed a steaming mug into my hands. "Chamomile with valerian root," she announced. "Better than anything he can give you." I stared at the tea, then at her. I wanted to shout that herbs wouldn't give me back my legs, that denial wouldn't restore my dignity, but the words stuck in my throat. I set the mug aside, untouched. That night, when Ryan finally crawled into bed beside me, I asked softly, "Do you really think therapy is a waste?" He rolled onto his back, staring at the ceiling. "I think we should be realistic. I don't want you to get hurt by false expectations." I turned away, tears stinging my eyes in the dark. Realistic. That word felt like a prison sentence. But somewhere deep inside me, a small flame had been lit. Dr. Carter's words echoed in my mind. "It's your body, your life." For the first time since the accident, I clung to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, my story wasn't over yet. It was late when Dr. Carter dropped me off that evening. The winter sky had already swallowed the last traces of daylight, leaving the world painted in shades of blue and black. The headlights from his car cut through the darkness as we pulled into our street. The snow piled high on either side of the road. I had spent the afternoon at a therapy session in his clinic because Eleanor had refused to let him work with me at home that day. claiming I was too disruptive in her space. It exhausted me, but for once I didn't mind the ache in my muscles. Each repetition, each attempt to push further than the last, reminded me that I wasn't completely powerless. Dr. Carter parked in front of the house, and I leaned back in my seat, catching my breath. "Thank you," I said softly. "For today. For everything." He offered me a small smile. "You're doing the hard work, Sophie. Don't forget that. Every bit of progress is yours." I wanted to believe him, wanted to hold on to that spark of hope. But the moment I turned my head toward the house, that hope curdled into something else. The porch light glowed faintly, illuminating two figures standing just beyond its reach. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but then the shapes sharpened, the silhouettes unmistakable. Ryan and a woman. They were close, too close. His hand rested on her waist, hers on his chest. And then, before my mind could reject it, I saw him lean down and kiss her. The world tilted. Air caught in my throat, refusing to move. My hands froze in my lap, trembling as if they belonged to someone else. "No," I whispered. The word scraped out of me, hoarse and broken. Dr. Carter followed my gaze. His jaw tightened, the kindness in his eyes replaced by something sharper, protective. "Sophie," he said carefully, but I barely heard him. I couldn't look away. Every second burned into me. The tilt of Ryan's head, the softness of his touch, the intimacy that used to be mine. My husband, the man who once carried me on his back down mountains when I twisted an ankle, who kissed me under starlit skies after long hikes, was now kissing another woman outside our home. The woman pulled back just enough for me to see her face in the light. Catherine Doyle, a name I had heard before. Someone from Ryan's office, mentioned casually in conversations I hadn't thought twice about. I remembered the laughter in his voice when he talked about her funny remarks during meetings. I remembered the way he checked his phone late at night, smiling at messages he claimed were about work. The sudden gym memberships, the excuses for late evenings. The signs had been there. I had seen them, felt them in the pit of my stomach, but I buried them beneath trust. I told myself I was imagining things, that my injury had made me paranoid. I had lied to myself, clinging to the illusion that Ryan was still mine. The truth stood on that porch, undeniable. Tears blurred my vision. I wanted to scream, to throw the car door open, to demand an explanation that would somehow erase what I had just witnessed. But my body betrayed me, frozen by shock, by grief, by the weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest. Dr. Carter placed a hand gently on my arm. "Sophie, don't do this to yourself. You don't need to see any more." I turned toward him, my voice breaking. "He's my husband." "I know," he said quietly, "but that doesn't excuse what he's doing." Ryan and Catherine disappeared into the house, the door closing softly behind them. The faint glow of the porch light remained, mocking me, as if to say that everything I once believed about my marriage had been a lie. Dr. Carter drove me around the block to give me time to compose myself. I tried to steady my breathing, but the images replayed over and over, cutting deeper each time. In the silence of the car, memories attacked me like cruel ghosts. The wedding vows Ryan whispered, promising to love me through sickness and health. The hikes where he swore he couldn't imagine life without me. The night after my accident, when he told me we would get through this together. Lies, all of them, or maybe truths that had decayed the moment my body broke. I pressed my palms to my eyes, trying to stop the flood of tears. "I was so blind," I muttered. I thought he loved me enough to fight for us." Dr. Carter's voice was steady, a quiet anchor. "You didn't do anything wrong. His choices are his own." But it didn't feel that way. It felt like failure, like I had lost everything that made me a wife, a partner, a woman. When he pulled back into the driveway later, the house loomed before me like a stranger. The warmth I once felt crossing that threshold was gone, replaced by a coldness that seeped into my bones. Dr. Carter helped me out of the car, his touch gentle but firm, steadying me as if he knew my legs weren't the only part of me that had collapsed. He didn't say much more, he didn't need to. The silence between us was filled with unspoken truths. That night, alone in my room, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, but I could hear muffled voices downstairs, Ryan's low tone, Catherine's soft laugh. The sound sliced through me, cruel reminders that the life I thought was mine was already slipping away. I clutched the blanket to my chest and let the tears come, hot and relentless. My marriage hadn't ended in an argument or a confession. It ended silently on a winter night, with a kiss I wasn't supposed to see. And as much as I tried to tell myself it wasn't over yet, a deeper voice inside whispered the truth. My marriage had collapsed, and I was standing alone in its ruins. Nights became the hardest. When the house fell into silence and the shadows stretched across the walls, I was left alone with the sound of my own breathing and the questions that never stopped haunting me. Ryan no longer came to bed the way he used to. Some nights he stayed late at the office. Other nights I heard the faint click of the back door after Eleanor had already gone upstairs. I told myself I didn't want to know where he was going, but my heart knew. I had already seen the truth with my own eyes. One night, restless and unable to sleep, I wheeled myself to the top of the staircase. The house was dark except for the soft glow of the kitchen light bleeding into the hallway. Voices drifted up, familiar voices. Ryan and Eleanor. I leaned forward, straining to hear, my pulse quickening. "She's dragging us down, Mom." Ryan's voice was sharp, low, the kind of tone he only used when he was being honest. "We can't keep living like this. The medical bills, the therapy, all of it, it's bleeding us dry." My breath caught. Eleanor's response came steady, almost soothing, but laced with steel. "You're right. Sophie is no longer the woman you married. She's become a weight. And what's worse, she controls the money your father left behind. That inheritance could secure your future, but as long as she's in the picture, you'll never see it." I gripped the armrests of my wheelchair so hard my fingers ached. Ryan let out a bitter laugh. "Catherine deserves better than this. She deserves a life I can't give her while I'm chained to Sophie. I can't keep pretending." The sound of her name, Catherine, like poison sliding down my spine. Eleanor leaned closer. I could hear the edge of her whisper. "Then we have to act. Slowly, carefully. She already relies on us. If she keeps drinking the teas I prepare, her body will weaken further. It will look natural. When the time comes, no one will question it. And the inheritance, it will finally be yours." The room tilted. My chest tightened until I thought I might choke. They weren't just betraying me. They were planning to erase me. For a moment, fear rooted me in place. My mind raced through images, Ryan laughing with Catherine, Eleanor handing me those steaming mugs of herbal tea each night, her sharp eyes watching until I sipped. My body remembered the strange heaviness, the sudden waves of dizziness, the way exhaustion seemed to crush me at odd hours. It hadn't been the accident alone. She had been feeding me poison disguised as kindness. I wheeled myself back into my room as quietly as possible, my heart hammering. Every sound seemed too loud. The creak of the floorboards, the soft squeak of the wheels. Once inside, I locked the door and pressed my back against it, trembling. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I could have imagined. Ryan, my husband, the man who once vowed to love me through sickness and health, was conspiring with his mother to kill me. My hands shook as I buried my face in them, fighting against the sobs that threatened to break me apart. But somewhere inside the storm of panic, another feeling took root. Determination. If they thought I would go quietly, they didn't know me at all. I had survived the fall, the diagnosis, the humiliation of being treated like a burden. I would survive this too. The next morning, I acted as if nothing had changed. I accepted Eleanor's tea with a weak smile, raising it to my lips, but never drinking more than a sip. When she left the room, I poured the rest into a potted plant by the window. Ryan barely looked at me, muttering a distracted morning before heading out the door. My stomach churned, but I kept my mask intact. Later that week, during one of Dr. Carter's visits, I asked him to stay behind after Eleanor stepped outside. My voice trembled as I whispered, "I need your help, but you can't tell anyone." His brow furrowed. "What's going on, Sophie?" I told him everything, the overheard conversation, the tea, the inheritance. His face darkened with anger, but he didn't interrupt. When I finished, he took a deep breath. "You're in danger," he said quietly. "You need to get out of here." "I can't," I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. "Not yet. If I leave with nothing, they'll win. I need to protect what's mine." He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "What do you want me to do?" I reached under the cushion of my chair and pulled out an envelope I had prepared. Copies of important documents, account information, proof of the inheritance my father had left me. My hands trembled as I pressed it into his. "Keep this safe. If anything happens to me, make sure they don't take it." His expression softened, his voice steady. "Nothing is going to happen to you. I won't let it." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of safety. I wasn't alone anymore. That night, lying awake in my bed, I thought about everything I had lost, my legs, my freedom, the man I thought loved me. And yet, in the ruins, I found a strange clarity. Ryan and Eleanor wanted me weak, broken, invisible. But the fire inside me refused to die. I wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. I was fighting for justice, for the memory of the girl who once ran free, for the woman who still existed inside me even if my body had betrayed me. Fear still gnawed at me, yes. The thought of another sip of that tea, another whisper behind closed doors, made my skin crawl. But beneath the fear was steel. They had no idea what I was capable of. And as I closed my eyes, clutching the faint thread of hope that Dr. Carter had given me, I swore to myself I would not be erased. The night it happened began like any other. Eleanor brought me my evening tea, steaming hot in a porcelain cup. Her hands were steady, her smile thin, as always. "Drink up, dear. It'll help you rest," she said, setting it on the table beside me. Ryan lingered nearby, restless, pacing with his phone in his hand. I hesitated. For weeks now, I had been pretending to drink, tipping the liquid into the potted plant the moment they left. But that night, Eleanor stood too close, her eyes fixed on me. I felt cornered. To refuse would raise suspicion. So I lifted the cup to my lips, forcing a sip, then another. The bitterness clung to my tongue. Within minutes, a heaviness spread through me. My limbs grew sluggish, my eyelids heavy. Panic rose in my chest. I tried to will myself toward my room, but the world blurred. I heard Eleanor's voice, low and cold. "It's time." And Ryan's answer, flat and hollow, "Do it." After that, everything went black. When I opened my eyes again, the first thing I felt was the cold. It stabbed through me, sharp and merciless, biting my skin even beneath layers of clothing. My breath puffed white into the night air, my body trembling violently. Snowflakes clung to my lashes, melting against the heat of my tears before I even realized I was crying. I tried to move, but I wasn't in my chair. They had left me sprawled in the snow, my legs useless, my arms stiff with frost. The trees loomed tall and silent around me, their branches heavy with ice. Above me, the sky stretched dark and endless, the moon casting a pale glow across the wilderness. My heart pounded as realization crashed down. They had left me here to die. The air was sharp in my lungs, each inhale like shards of glass. I pushed my palms into the snow, dragging myself forward inch by inch. My arms shook with the effort, my body screaming for warmth, but all around me was white silence. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, long and mournful, and the sound froze me to the marrow. Terror clawed at my chest. Was this how it ended? Not in a hospital, not in the safety of a home, but abandoned in the middle of a Minnesota forest, to be swallowed by snow and silence? I thought of my father, of his plane crash all those years ago, and how people had said he never stood a chance. Was I about to share his fate? My vision blurred, spots dancing in the air. My fingers were numb, my lips trembling as I whispered, "Please, not like this." I thought of Dr. Carter's voice, steady and certain, telling me I was stronger than I believed. I thought of the little flame I had been fighting to keep alive inside me. Was it about to be snuffed out here in the middle of nowhere? The howls grew closer, multiplied, echoing through the trees. My breathing turned frantic, shallow. My arms gave way, and I collapsed into the snow, the chill seeping deeper, pulling me under. But then a sound. Footsteps crunching against the frozen ground. Not wolves. Human. I tried to lift my head, but my neck refused. A shadow fell across me, tall and broad. A man's voice, rough and urgent, cut through the cold. "Dear God!" Strong hands slid beneath my shoulders, lifting me gently from the snow. I tried to fight, to resist. What if it was Ryan coming back to finish what he started? But when I forced my eyes open, I saw not my husband, but a stranger. His face was lined with age, his beard flecked with gray, his eyes wide with shock. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. His features were so achingly familiar. The jawline, the set of his brow, the warmth in his gaze, even beneath the panic. My lips parted, the word barely escaping as a breath. "Dad!" The man froze. His grip on me tightened, his eyes filling with tears. "Sophie!" he whispered, his voice breaking. "It can't be. Sophie!" I stared at him, my heart lurching violently. Edward Whitmore. My father. The man I had buried in my grief 15 years ago after a plane crash that left nothing but wreckage. He had been declared dead, mourned, and gone. Yet here he was, holding me in his arms, alive. The shock nearly stole what little breath I had left. You're alive." He nodded, his face contorted with sorrow and disbelief. "I should have come back sooner. I never stopped thinking of you." His words tumbled out, urgent, desperate. "But we need to get you out of here first." I clung to him weakly as he carried me through the snow, my body limp against his strength. I could feel his heart pounding through his chest, his warmth seeping into my frozen skin. Each step jolted me back toward life, each breath of his against my hair a reminder that I wasn't dead yet. The forest blurred around us, the cries of wolves fading into the distance. I buried my face into his coat, the smell of wood smoke and earth overwhelming my senses. My father who had vanished into legend and grief, was alive, and he had found me in the moment I needed him most. When we reached the cabin, tucked deep among the trees, he set me down near the fire, wrapping blankets around me. My teeth chattered uncontrollably, my body fighting the shock of cold. He crouched in front of me, his eyes searching mine, raw with emotion. "I thought I'd lost you forever," he said, his voice breaking. Tears spilled down my cheeks. "I thought I buried you." He gripped my hands, warming them between his. "There's so much you don't know. But right now, all that matters is you're alive. And I swear, Sophie, I will never let anyone hurt you again." As the fire crackled and warmth began to seep back into my bones, the terror of the night slowly ebbed, replaced by something equally overwhelming. The impossible truth that the man I had mourned was back. And with him, perhaps a chance to reclaim more than just my life. The fire snapped and hissed in the small stone hearth, throwing shadows across the walls of the cabin. My body still shook from the cold, but the blankets and the flames had begun to coax life back into my limbs. I sat there, staring at the man across from me, my mind reeling. His eyes were the same warm brown I remembered from childhood. His voice, though rougher now, still carried the cadence of comfort I had thought I'd never hear again. Edward Whitmore. My father. Alive. I don't understand. I whispered, my throat raw. They said you died. The crash, they showed us the wreckage. There was nothing left. He leaned back, rubbing his hands over his face as though trying to scrub away years of pain. His beard was unkempt, his skin weathered by wind and time. But beneath the roughness was the man I had once clung to, the man who used to lift me onto his shoulders so I could see above the crowds. The crash was real, he said quietly. But death, that was Eleanor's story, not mine. At the sound of her name, my stomach twisted. Eleanor. He nodded, bitterness tightening his jaw. She orchestrated everything. She told the world I was gone because it gave her exactly what she wanted. Control. The inheritance. The house. The name. And once she convinced the courts to declare me dead, she had it all. I stared at him, my mind spinning. You're saying she knew you were alive? He let out a hollow laugh. She knew. She arranged it. The crash wasn't an accident, Sophie. My plane was tampered with. I survived by sheer luck, crawling out of the wreckage, half dead. By the time I stumbled back to civilization, Eleanor had already buried me in absentia. The paperwork was signed, the accounts drained, the house transferred. My heart hammered in my chest. She stole everything. She always wanted more than she had, he muttered, reaching for a bottle on the table. He poured amber liquid into a chipped glass, his hand trembling as he lifted it. And she got it. She made sure I was erased, and she succeeded. I tried to fight. I tried to prove I was alive. But no one would listen. By the time I had strength again, it was too late. She had buried me with lies. He drank deeply, the smell of whiskey sharp in the air. His eyes glazed for a moment, and I saw the years of defeat etched into his face. So I disappeared, out here in the woods. Easier to be forgotten than to fight a war I couldn't win. Tears burned in my eyes. The father I had mourned for so long hadn't been dead. He had been alive, destroyed not by fate but by Eleanor's greed. I wheeled closer to the fire, pulling the blanket tighter around me. All this time, I whispered, I thought I lost you. And she's been in my house, controlling my life, treating me like my voice broke. He looked up sharply, his gaze cutting through the fog of alcohol. Tell me, Sophie, what has she done to you? And so I told him. Everything. The accident. The hospital. The coldness of my homecoming. The endless chores, the poisoned teas, Ryan's betrayal, Catherine's shadow, the whispers of conspiracy I overheard. My voice shook, but once I started, I couldn't stop. I poured out every humiliation, every fear, every moment of despair I had swallowed to keep surviving. By the time I finished, Edward's hands were clenched into fists on his knees. His face was pale with fury. That woman, he growled, and that boy, they tried to bury you the way she buried me. I nodded, my own tears spilling freely now. I thought I was going to die out there, Dad. If you hadn't found me, he leaned forward, gripping my hands in his. His touch was rough, calloused, but full of fierce determination. You won't die, Sophie. Not like this. I lost everything once because I was too broken to fight. I won't let that happen to you. I shook my head, sobbing. I can't fight them. I can't even walk. Yes, you can. His voice was sharp, insistent. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But you will stand again. And even if you never take another step, you'll still rise above them. You have more strength in you than either of them will ever know. His words lit something inside me, a spark against the darkness that had been swallowing me whole. I remembered Dr. Carter's steady encouragement, the way he refused to let me give up during therapy. Now, hearing the same conviction in my father's voice, I felt the possibility take root. The following days blurred into a rhythm of recovery. My father's cabin was rough but safe, and every morning he pushed me to do what I could. He set up makeshift exercises, urging me to rebuild what strength I had left in my arms and core. At first, my muscles screamed with every movement, my body resisting. But he never let me quit. And Dr. Carter, dear, steadfast Dr. Carter, continued to visit in secret. I had managed to send word through a neighbor who owed my father a favor, and Michael didn't hesitate. When he saw me alive, hidden away, relief flooded his face. He didn't ask for explanations right then. He just got to work, guiding me through careful routines, checking my vitals, teaching me how to protect my body from further damage. Between the two of them, the father I had thought I lost, and the doctor who refused to let me give up, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. At night, when the fire burned low and my father nursed another drink, I would watch him silently. He was a man broken by betrayal, consumed by years of isolation and whiskey, but he was still my father. And beneath his grief and anger was a fierce love that had never died. One evening, as he adjusted the blankets around me, he looked me in the eye. "Sophie," he said, his voice thick but steady, "I failed once. I let her destroy my life. I won't let her destroy yours. Whatever it takes, I'll help you stand again, both on your feet and in this world." I swallowed hard, my throat tight with emotion. For the first time in so long, I believed him. I believed in us. The war Eleanor and Ryan had begun wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time I wasn't fighting alone. The first time I managed to shift my legs, it was hardly a movement at all. Just the faintest twitch of muscle, a ripple under the skin that might have gone unnoticed if not for the sharp intake of breath from Dr. Carter, who was watching closely. "There!" he said softly, kneeling beside me. His eyes lit up with quiet triumph. "Did you feel that?" I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. Barely, but it was something. It had taken weeks of relentless effort. My father had crafted a makeshift training space in his cabin, while Dr. Carter brought equipment whenever he visited: resistance bands, weighted cuffs, a therapy ball. The exercises left me drenched in sweat, every muscle screaming, but I clung to them. Each repetition was a declaration: I am still here. Sometimes I collapsed into sobs midway, hating my body for betraying me, hating Ryan and Eleanor for turning my weakness into a weapon against me. But Dr. Carter never let me quit. He steadied me when my arms shook, encouraged me when despair clouded my thoughts. "You don't have to be perfect," he told me once as I broke down in frustration. "You just have to keep trying. That's what strength is." I looked at him then, really looked at him. His patience, his unwavering presence. It wasn't professional detachment. It was care, genuine human care. And somewhere deep inside me, something shifted. A warmth I hadn't let myself feel since before the accident stirred, confusing and frightening all at once. But each time my heart pulled toward him, guilt dragged me back. Ryan's face haunted me. Not the Ryan who betrayed me, but the Ryan I had once loved. The man who held me at the summit of mountains, who whispered promises under the stars. I didn't know how to reconcile the husband I remembered with the stranger who plotted my death. Late at night, lying by the fire in my father's cabin, I turned those thoughts over and over. Part of me still clung to the marriage, to the idea that love could survive even the worst betrayal. But another part, stronger now, knew the truth, that marriage had already collapsed, and what remained was nothing but ashes. Meanwhile, the world beyond our cabin was unraveling. Ryan reported me missing within days of my disappearance. I learned this from Dr. Carter, who had connections at the hospital and heard whispers through colleagues. The story was that I had wandered off in confusion and vanished. Search parties were organized. News outlets picked up the case. My name, my face, flashed on screens as though I were already a ghost. "Missing wife," the headline said. "Tragic accident, survivor disappears from home." But Ryan didn't grieve. Not really. Reports described his demeanor as strangely calm, even detached. He told neighbors he was coping the best he could. And Catherine was spotted by his side more than once, her hand resting on his arm like a replacement that had been waiting in the wings. Eleanor, however, began to crumble. Her paranoia grew, feeding on itself. She called banks repeatedly, checking balances. She snapped at Ryan, accusing him of being careless. I imagined her pacing their pristine kitchen, clutching at her pearls, wondering why money seemed to slip through her fingers despite her control. They didn't know about the envelope I had given Dr. Carter. They didn't know I had already begun to outmaneuver them. I pictured them in that house, the same house where I had once felt safe. Now, every corner of it was poisoned by greed and lies. They thought I was gone for good. They thought they had won. But while they drowned in suspicion and deceit, I was learning to rise again. Every day in that cabin, my father pushed me. "One more rep, Sophie," he would say, his voice gruff but full of pride. "You've got more fight in you than you realize." And when I faltered, Dr. Carter was there. Sometimes his hand brushed mine when he adjusted my grip, and the warmth lingered long after. Once, when I nearly fell from the therapy bars, he caught me, holding me steady until my breathing slowed. For a moment, our eyes locked, and something unspoken passed between us. Something tender, dangerous, and undeniable. I pulled back quickly, my cheeks burning. "I can't," I whispered. He didn't press. He just nodded. "Then don't. Not until you're ready." That patience, his willingness to wait, to let me decide, meant more than any declaration of love could have. Still, the conflict raged inside me. My body ached from the exercises, my heart from the war between past and future. But with every twitch of muscle, every shift of weight, I felt myself coming back to life. Not just physically, but in spirit. One morning, after weeks of training, I managed to pull myself upright with the help of the bars. My arms shook, sweat poured down my back, but I was standing, if only for seconds. My father cheered like I'd just run a marathon, his eyes glistening. Dr. Carter smiled, his voice low but full of awe. "That's it, Sophie. That's you. Alive. Fighting." I collapsed back into the chair, sobbing, but this time my tears weren't only grief. They were relief, triumph, proof that Eleanor and Ryan hadn't broken me completely. As the snow melted outside, the days lengthened, and spring whispered promises of renewal, I felt the darkness inside me begin to thin. But I also knew the battle wasn't over. Far from it, because somewhere in that suburban house, Ryan and Eleanor still believed I was gone. They still believed the inheritance was theirs for the taking. And when they learned the truth, that I was alive, that I was stronger than before, everything they had built on lies would come crashing down. Until then, I would keep training, keep breathing, keep fighting. Step by step, rep by rep, heartbeat by heartbeat. And when the time came, I would be ready. The day I walked into the police station was the day everything changed. My legs still trembled with every step, my grip on the cane tight enough to turn my knuckles white, but I was standing. Not just for myself, but for the truth. For the life they had tried to erase. Ryan and Eleanor had been summoned that morning under the pretense of a follow-up in the missing persons case. According to Dr. Carter, who had quietly fed me updates, detectives had begun to notice inconsistencies in their statements. Neighbors had reported unusual behavior. Eleanor's agitation, Ryan's calm indifference, Catherine's too frequent visits. The cracks were widening. Edward walked beside me as we entered the building, his presence a steady weight at my side. He looked healthier than he had weeks earlier, his shoulders straighter, his eyes sharp. Sobriety and purpose had begun to mend him. I leaned on him as much as on my cane, both of us bracing for the storm we were about to unleash. The station buzzed with activity, phones ringing, officers shuffling papers, voices carrying down the hall. When the detective leading the case spotted me, his eyes widened. "Mrs. Whitmore," he whispered as if seeing a ghost. I nodded. "I'm ready." They led us to the interrogation room where Ryan and Eleanor sat. Ryan looked tired but composed, his suit immaculate, his hair styled as if appearance alone could shield him. Eleanor, on the other hand, fidgeted with her hands, her eyes darting nervously. The door swung open and I stepped inside. The sound of my cane against the tile echoed like a drumbeat. Ryan's head jerked up, his eyes widening, his mouth falling open. Sophie! His voice cracked on my name. For a moment, the room froze. Eleanor went pale, her lips parting soundlessly. I could almost see the thoughts racing through her mind, the years of control unraveling in an instant. I stood tall, or as tall as my trembling body allowed, and let the silence hang heavy before I spoke. Surprised to see me alive? Ryan pushed back from his chair, his face drained of color. I thought you. They said you. He stumbled over his words, caught between lies and the shock of my presence. I cut him off. You thought you'd buried me. You and your mother left me in the snow, drugged and helpless. You thought no one would ever find me. Eleanor slammed her hand on the table, her composure cracking. That's ridiculous. She's delusional. You can't believe a word she says. But Edward stepped forward, his voice ringing clear. Enough, Eleanor. His presence filled the room, and for the first time in decades, he looked every bit the man she had tried to destroy. Your lies end here. Ryan turned, confusion twisting his features. Dad. The word slipped out before he could stop it. Recognition flashed in his eyes. Edward Whitmore, alive, undeniable. Ryan staggered back, his hands trembling. That's impossible. You're dead. Edward's face hardened. You made me dead in name. Your mother buried me under lies, so she could steal what wasn't hers, just as you tried to do with Sophie. The detective's eyes narrowed, his pen scribbling rapidly across his notepad. The tension in the room was thick, the walls closing in on Ryan and Eleanor with every passing second. Eleanor's mask cracked completely. She surged forward, her voice rising. She was supposed to disappear. She was weak, a burden. We gave her everything, and she repaid us by ruining our lives. I wasn't going to let her drag us down like she did you. The words spilled from her mouth before she realized what she had admitted. The room went silent, the weight of her confession sinking in like a stone. The detective's pen stilled. Another officer shifted in his seat, eyes locked on her with sharp intensity. Ryan's head dropped into his hands. For the first time, he didn't try to argue, didn't try to spin another story. The fight drained from him, leaving only a hollow shell of the man I once thought I loved. I felt the ache in my chest, the echo of years spent believing in a marriage that never truly existed. But as I looked at him now, broken, cornered, undone, I realized I no longer felt love. Not even hate, only emptiness. The detective spoke at last, his tone clipped. Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Whitmore, your statements today will be entered into evidence. You have the right to remain silent, but I think you've already said enough. He signaled to the officers at the door. As handcuffs clicked into place, Eleanor screamed, thrashing against the officers. This is all lies. She's manipulating you. She's... Her words dissolved into incoherent rage as they pulled her from the room. Ryan didn't resist. He lifted his head just long enough to meet my eyes. For a fleeting second, I saw a flash of the man I once knew, buried beneath layers of cowardice and betrayal. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. He bowed his head, defeated. I stood there, cane steady in my hand, my father's presence strong at my side. For the first time since the accident, I felt tall again. Not because my legs carried me, but because I had survived, because they had failed to erase me. As Ryan and Eleanor were led away, I exhaled a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The weight of months of betrayal, fear, and despair lifted slightly from my chest. The war wasn't over yet, but the battlefield had shifted. The lies had crumbled. The truth was finally in the light. Edward squeezed my shoulder gently, his voice low but resolute. You stood today, Sophie, in every way that matters. And as I looked around the room, at the stunned faces of the officers who had witnessed it all, I realized he was right. This was more than survival. This was justice. The weeks that followed moved like a blur. yet every moment felt heavier than the last. News of Ryan and Eleanor's arrest spread quickly through Minneapolis. Headlines painted the story as something out of a Gothic novel. Husband and mother-in-law charged in plot against disabled wife. Neighbors who once smiled politely at me now whispered in hushed tones about the scandal, shaking their heads at the betrayal that had festered behind our closed doors. Ryan and Eleanor sat in holding cells while prosecutors built the case. Their lawyers scrambled, trying to spin the narrative into something less monstrous. But the truth was undeniable. Eleanor's outburst at the station had sealed her fate, and Ryan's silence only made him appear complicit. I didn't need to attend every hearing to know the walls were closing in on them. For the first time in months, I felt the faint taste of freedom. It wasn't immediate, of course. I still woke some nights, drenched in sweat, hearing echoes of Eleanor's voice urging Ryan to finish it, feeling the weight of snow on my chest as if I were still lying in that forest. But each morning when I opened my eyes in my father's cabin and felt the warmth of the fire, I reminded myself, I survived. And not just survived, I had returned stronger. The courts began the process of restoring what was rightfully mine. The inheritance my father had left me, siphoned and controlled for years, was placed back in my name. Eleanor's fraudulent deeds were undone, her accounts frozen, her influence erased. But as the signatures dried and the accounts shifted, I realized something profound. The money wasn't what mattered. It was the principle. It was proof that their lies had crumbled, that their power was gone. Edward watched all of this with quiet pride. He had spent years hidden in shame and solitude, but standing by me seemed to awaken something in him. He began to drink less, his hands steadier each morning. Sometimes I caught him staring at me with tears in his eyes, whispering that he couldn't believe he had a second chance to be my father. We spoke often by the fire about the years we lost, about the pain Eleanor had caused both of us, but more importantly about the future. For the first time, we were allowed to dream again. And then there was Dr. Carter. Michael never pushed, never rushed me. He came by for therapy sessions, guiding me through exercises, helping me strengthen muscles I thought were long gone. But outside of the exercises, there was something more, a gentleness in the way he looked at me, a respect that felt foreign after so much betrayal. When he smiled, it wasn't with pity. It was with admiration. One afternoon, after I managed to stand for nearly a full minute with only the cane, my father clapped his hands in celebration. Michael's eyes softened as he studied me, and for a fleeting moment I leaned into him, not just for balance, but for comfort. My heart stuttered with something I hadn't felt in so long, the possibility of love. But it wasn't like before. It wasn't desperate or blind. It wasn't built on promises that could be broken in the shadows of our home. It was steady, patient waiting, and I knew I would only step into it when I was ready. The sentencing came months later. Ryan stood in court, his once confident posture crumbled into defeat. Eleanor sat beside him, her face gaunt, her hands trembling as the charges were read aloud. Attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud. Their pleas were swallowed by the weight of evidence, by the undeniable truth of what they had done. When the gavel fell and the sentences were handed down, I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I simply breathed. Justice had arrived, not in fury, but in quiet certainty. Walking out of that courthouse on my cane, with my father on one side and Dr. Carter on the other, I realized that my revenge had already been written, not in their downfall, but in my survival. Because sweet revenge isn't watching your enemies crumble. It isn't shouting victory over the ashes of their lives. It's living well, living free, living true. It's choosing not to be defined by betrayal, but by resilience. I had lost so much, my health, my marriage, my sense of safety. But I had also gained something priceless. The truth, my father, my strength, and the faint beginnings of a love built on respect rather than deceit. That night, as the three of us sat by the fire, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. Edward leaned back in his chair, his eyes glistening as he watched the flames. Michael brewed tea, not Eleanor's bitter concoctions, but something warm and soothing, and handed me a cup with a smile. I sipped slowly, the warmth spreading through me. For the first time, tea didn't taste like poison. It tasted like possibility. As I stared into the fire, I thought about the girl I had been, the climber, the dreamer, the wife who believed love was unbreakable. She had died on that mountainside with a snap of her spine. But in her place, a new woman had risen, scarred, yes, but stronger. And as the flames crackled, I whispered silently to myself, I am no one's burden. I am no one's victim. This was my dawn, and it was sweeter than any revenge I could have imagined.